So just a very brief introduction to BehaviourWorks. We're a applied behaviour change research unit. So, and we sit inside a Sustainable Development Institute. So all the work we do is for the betterment of people or planet. And we work with lots and lots of different partners to take behavioural science and the best that it offers to try and help achieve those outcomes. That's in a nutshell. I really want to acknowledge particularly Humanitarian Advisory Group for partnering us on some of that work and really glad to do this today. Thanks.
And of course, our research scientist representing the work of BehaviourWorks Australia tonight is Kun Zhao. Big round of applause for Kun, please. Step into the line.
Thank you, Geoff. You're too kind. Hi, everyone. I'm Kun. I'm a researcher at BehaviourWorks Australia. And for the last 6 months, I've been the resident behavioural scientist working with the HAG team. And so you might be wondering, what does a behavioural scientist do? Well, behavioural science draws on scientific methods to understand and predict human behaviour and the behaviour of groups. So for the last 6 months, we've been working closely with HAG to try to understand some of the problems in the humanitarian world through a behavioural lens, and hopefully we can share some of that with you today.
And last but not least, Beth Eggleston, ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause.
Thank you. Every event I speak at from now on, I'm going to have you. Every single one. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I know you've all, had very busy, long days doing lots of different things. I know some of you are coming from the crisis management space, some coming from emergency management, humanitarian action. So it's lovely to have a really diverse and interesting group here today. So yes, I'm Beth. I am the oldest HAG that we have at Humanitarian Advisory Group, and I'm very proud of that. So HAG, we're a small social enterprise. We've been going for, actually just on Sunday, we had our 11th birthday. Oh. So we're now a proud team of 16 people. We have people here in Victoria, but also in Paris and the Philippines and Sydney at the moment as well. So some of the key work that we want to draw on when we're talking about behavioural science today, some of the research we're doing, really looking at the power dynamics and inequities in the international humanitarian system, looking at how we can green disaster response. We would like to think that while we're saving lives, we don't have to trample on the environment. And also trying to turn some of our research into guidance that has a practical kind of use, especially when it comes to inclusion and that kind of thing. And I was reading a report recently that was talking about some key aspects that we really need to focus on. And that was around looking at political development nexus. It was around looking at evolving complexity of different contexts. It was looking at resilience, a whole bunch of things. And it turned out that was a report actually looking at disaster response in Australia. So I'm very passionate about trying to learn, have cross-learning between the international humanitarian system and actually what's happening right here on our doorstep. So I think when we have our research products, a lot of the recommendations that we come out, clients often say to us, well, that's something we actually knew about. So behavioural science, I believe, maybe not the magic bullet, but it really is, I think, the missing link, as it were, is actually how do we shift the dial? How do we ensure that the kind of things that we are learning about through the work that we're doing, how do we actually apply them in real world context? How do we get policymakers and donors and governments and NGOs and other organisations to actually change their behaviour so that we can actually have a better response, whether that be in Australia or overseas?
So the two silver bullets there with the cross means that we don't have any silver bullets. We're not saying that we have any magic solutions for you. Tonight we're going to present some biases, some of the tricks that the people fall into, some behavioural attempts that have backfired, some pitfalls, and hopefully some solutions. So we don't make any wild, outlandish promises unless you have a lot of money that you do want to throw at us, in which case we're happy to come up with any promise you like.
Anyone you like.
And this that you can barely see on the screen is the Codex of Biases. So we have habits, we have shortcuts, mental shortcuts, and they're called heuristics. And this is the Codex of Biases. So research scientists managed to put 200, or at least, together in 2016. And if you want to waste a day of your life, look this up on the internet, and each one of these is a Wikipedia entry. You can click on any of these and it will explain what they are.
Often we like to think that we are rational human beings, that we take in all the relevant information, that we weigh up the pros and the cons, and we make a good calculated decision, and we might plan ahead. But And often that does happen, but we also have these mental shortcuts, these rules of thumbs, which we call heuristics. And for the most part, they work quite well. You know, they can help us navigate this very complex, information-rich world that we live in, but sometimes they also trip us up as well, and they might cause us to act in ways that deviate from what we might consider is rational. And so today we're going to share some of that with you as well, particularly the ones that are relevant to the humanitarian system.
So we've got 4 big problems that our shortcuts, our biases try to fix. One is there's too much information in the world. As you know, anyone trying to look at Netflix will know that you'll just keep scrolling and scrolling. There's actually just too much in the world. There's not enough meaning, so we choose our own meanings. We make our own meanings. We fill in the gaps. Because we don't know what the meaning is, we can't stand the emptiness, so we fill it in. We need to act fast. We're constantly having to make decisions in life, at work, just in the world. And we often use memory basically to measure what's happening at the moment, and we draw on selective parts of our memory to see what is actually going on. So we've got these things happening all the time. So I have reduced the biases down to, it's actually 6. If you're wondering why there's 12 sections, it's because 12 was the only template I could find. They're doubled up, okay? There's actually 6. But hopefully with any luck, we should be able to, if I can get the cursor to, well, there it is, there it is. And hey!
We need some music.
Yeah. This is one of the shortcuts. We're easily distracted by colourful spinning things. All right. Okay. Now I have to. Okay. Status quo bias. Kun.
Yes. So people have a tendency to prefer their current way of doing things. So this is a typical if it ain't broke, then don't fix it mentality. But the problem is that this inertia might lead us to avoid or miss out on new opportunities and solutions if we stick to the status quo.
So we've got examples here with organ donations, payroll, giving, clean energy. If people have to opt into something, they are a little resistant to it because they have to change their behaviour. If they have to opt out, the same rule applies. So in many countries where organ donations are automatic, when you get your car licence, you are signed up for organ donations. Those countries have over 80 or 90% organ donation rates. Australia doesn't. You have to actually opt into that system. And because of that, we have a much, much lower organ donation rate.
Many people who work in the humanitarian sector here will have heard of this idea of, transformation of the humanitarian sector. I mean, do you feel transformed? Have you seen the transformation? Not quite. So, I mean, this started in 2005, and there hasn't really been what I would call a transformational shift. And I don't know whether or not it's just in the midst of a crisis, people sort of feel like, oh, I have to throw that out. I'm just going to do what I normally did. So, this is the way it's always been done. So people just go forth and they just, coordinate how they used to. They have relationships with the same kind of organisations. And we haven't seen that kind of transformational shift that would allow us to actually deliver a better response.
We are going to be called up for a referendum this year. And one of the major arguments that people have said is even the act of trying to make a change is something that Australians are not used to. They often fail. I think things are changing at the moment for that, but that's one of the arguments that they use. Stereotyping. All right, Kun.
So stereotyping is the tendency to place people into categories or types based on very limited information that we have about them. So it might be some aspect of their identity, their appearance, very superficial bits of information. And so we have these preconceived generalizations about what people are like based on very limited information.
So we have these stereotypes and they're a quick way to actually formulate what's going on in the world. And we're going to throw it open to you now. I'm going to flick the button and hopefully your screens will give you a chance to come up with words and phrases about humanitarian. And it's totally anonymous and they will appear as a word cloud. So get ready for this.
The hippie. I was
Is there a
hoping the hippie came out. I'm the saviour.
Wow, that's the fullest I think we have ever seen, a word cloud. Okay, Beth, do you want to pick it apart? We've got do-gooder.
Yeah,
white
I like,
saviour.
I'm a bit of a fan myself of the white saviour.
Yeah,
it's one of my favourites. I hope there's some dreadlocks there. I haven't seen the sandals yet. That's a bit of a problem. I do like the cowboy, especially
Cowboy.
French cowboys.
Do-gooder.
Yeah.
So we have these ideas about the way humanitarians work and who they are. And this totally random system has generated these ideas as we speak, and people are still finding. I've got to move to the next wheel. Okay, loss aversion. So how much would it take for you to accept the bet that tails loses 100 and heads wins an amount of money? And hopefully this will turn up on your phones now. What would you need to win to accept the bet? So this is pretty consistent with the research that says, due to loss aversion and losses being looming larger than gains, most people would need to win 2.5 or 3 times as much as they're prepared to lose. What's the mechanism going on there?
Yes, so when it comes to decision making, losses loom larger than gains. We care more about what we lose compared to what we gain, and that means, again, we might miss out on new opportunities too. It's quite a fundamental bias or way of thinking, and even in the humanitarian world, you see it embedded in some of those humanitarian ethical principles like doing no harm, first do no harm.
I don't know if anyone's been on the internet, looked for something and had a pop-up saying 2 other people are looking at this right now. It's triggering that sense of loss. I must grab this while I can, airfare or hotel or room or something like that. How does it work in the humanitarian sector?
Well, I think who has heard of the localisation agenda? People heard about how we're localising? So often we hear about this push to have locally led humanitarian response. If you're talking to those who are actually providing the funds for that to happen, you know, they're often going to say, oh no, but if we give money to local organisations, they don't have the financial systems to deal with that. Obviously fraud could occur. Obviously fraud has never happened in a large international NGO, ever. Or a contractor, or government, or any other kind of organisation. And also, I guess what I find frustrating about that is the sums of money that may be going to those local organisations are so small compared to their other pieces of the pie. So yeah, it's quite frustrating.
Yeah. Many of you will be familiar with framing. How does it work?
Yeah, so framing basically means for the same information, different ways or even subtly different ways of presenting that information will evoke different emotions and lead to quite different ways of behaving.
So we have a choice of only 20% fat or 80% fat free. It's the same number, but how you frame it will be more or less appealing. And we've got examples over here of the monster wildfire in Bordeaux. If it's framed as an animal sort of thing, you can have different results.
Yeah, so related to framing is the use of metaphor to describe certain events. And we see it a lot in the media. You know, we hear about the war against cancer or the war on drugs, monstrous wildfires, rising crime rates are plaguing rural WA. And there's been some really interesting studies looking at the use of metaphor and how that might affect behaviour. So in one study, in the context of disaster response, people read about a monstrous wildfire eating up large bits of land, and these people were more willing to evacuate their homes compared to those who read about a major wildfire that was burning up areas of land. So the way that we frame things using metaphor can impact people's responses and behaviour.
All right. Sunk cost, the sunk cost bias. What does that mean?
Yes, so many of us have heard of the sunk cost bias. The more we've invested in something, the harder it is to quit. So we stick to things that have cost us purely because they've cost us. And there's a really nice study, I think, from Singapore, where they looked at the sunk cost associated with cars. And this had changed over the years due to government policy. And they found out that the greater the sunk cost associated with a car, the more people tended to drive those cars later on. I'll let you have a look at that.
So who has ever sat through a movie that they hated, but they sat through it because they paid for that movie? Huh? Who has stuck with a job beyond the time that they enjoyed the job? Okay.
No,
it happens.
put your hands up. No, I'm like, no, don't raise it.
It happens with relationships, and at a national level, it happens with wars. The minute that you commit to something like that and lives are lost, more resources are put into something, and it happens right across the world that we sink. It's what's happened in the past that's important, not what's going to happen in the future. Be careful of behavioural pitfalls. Here are some attempts at behaviour change that either backfire or have been problematic in the process. Hand washing.
Knowledge alone is rarely the only barrier to behaviour change. if it really was just about information, then we'd all be going to the gym every day and avoiding junk food and flossing our teeth, which isn't always the case.
People are unpredictable. So this is the simulated babies example. This was an experiment that they did, or a study that they did on at-risk teenage girls who they thought may be at risk of unplanned pregnancies. They were given simulated babies. I don't know if people have heard of this scheme. The babies cost a couple of grand each. I think they cry. They're very needy. They're not as needy as your baby, clearly. Because you were saying, wait till they get a real kid.
Yeah.
And the idea being that how these girls are chosen, I don't know, but they followed this through to see if there was, compared to a control group, less unplanned pregnancies. And the results didn't show that this intervention was particularly effective in changing the outcome. Do they know why? Is there any speculation as to?
They weren't sure, but it did increase in the group that had used the simulated babies. My theory, since having a kid, is that the babies just weren't unpleasant enough. Where's the vomit? Where's the crying every 5 minutes? But the main takeaway from this is that, you know, we can use our most rigorous, our best methods, but people are still unpredictable, and this really speaks to the importance of testing and evaluating our impact, which I'm sure many in the room would be very familiar with.
All right, incentives can go wrong. This one's a great one. This was a study done at an Israeli childcare centre. They had parents that would drop the kids off, and there was a couple of the parents were late with the pickups. So the people who ran the childcare said, look, let's give them a fine. Not a big fine, just a small fine, to create an incentive for the parents to pick the kids up on time. Late pickups exploded because there had been a kind of a social norm that you would do the right thing with all the other parents and the kids, and that was replaced with money. What happened there?
Yeah, so we often think that we know incentives, that they might be quite straightforward. You know, rewarding people will encourage a behaviour, punishments will decrease that behaviour. But sometimes incentives can be quite unpredictable and can backfire as well. This is an example of where financial incentives crowd out or reduce other types of motivations. So prior to the fine, parents might have been motivated by other things like guilt or not trying to inconvenience the childcare centre. But then if it's really just about paying $5 for an extra 5 minutes of childcare, well, that's not too bad a deal.
So it's one of these examples where incentives, if you're going to have a fine, make it the right fine, basically, the right incentive. And of course, even technological solutions need behaviour change. Many of you would be familiar with an attempt to get toilets, a $30 billion program in India to establish toilets. Has not been as successful as they thought.
Yeah, I think with this one, they were talking about they needed to really provide people support with the behaviour change, and also things like how do we maintain sewerage systems, who's going to be cleaning up all of this. And, you know, this really speaks to the fact that often we think the solution is around technology or infrastructure, but even when that comes about, we still need behaviour change to support that. COVID was another example as well. For the first year or so of the pandemic, the whole world was looking to a vaccine. And when that vaccine was developed, then we needed to go out, to get people to go out and actually get the vaccination. And that turned out to be quite a challenge in some cases too.
All right, good intentions are not enough. What are these images? Beth, you might talk to particularly donations. What's happening here?
Yeah, so this lovely chandelier here, I believe that one was in Rwanda in 1994. The shoes here, I think these might have been Haiti earthquake, I think. So people really, it's great to see that people at least are getting a bit adventurous with the kind of shit that they send to disasters. I mean, it's not boring, just bottled water anymore. Yeah, but I mean, it's quite shocking what happens really in this, what we call unsolicited bilateral donations, when people send their useless shit to disasters. Because also it's really trying to unpack, it's not just that it's not useful, it's also the emissions that it costs to get there, the number of people hours to unpack or store those goods once they arrive. And there's some examples about in Cyclone Pam in Vanuatu, 70 shipping containers worth of stuff came over. So not only did it clog up the port, so other emergency relief was not able to come in, Then the government of Vanuatu, who were on their knees trying to respond and actually provide goods and services for their population, had to pay something like $2.5 million to store the stuff in warehouses. That, you know, is probably all off. But I mean, most of the medicine that gets sent is out of date, clothing is inappropriate. Pork, the tinned pork was sent to Afghanistan, labelled as beef. So, you know, there's the greatest hits of unsolicited bilateral donations.
Wow.
So they're really quite fabulous.
Yes, yeah. And this particular picture here, Kun, what's
Yes,
this
so
picture
this
of?
was in the aftermath of Sandy Hook, actually, and where thousands and thousands of teddy bears were sent to the town. I think there were 3 teddy bears for every resident of the town, and it took 6 months to ship all those teddy bears back out again to various hospitals and orphanages and eventually overseas as well.
All right, so how do we stop useless goods being sent to humanitarian crises in the Pacific? Now, we're going to have 4 messages and you have to vote which you think is the most effective. One that says only cash is best. Very simple message. 2, donated goods clog supply chains. So it's the clogging factor that's the issue. 3, donated goods are delayed in reaching the disaster zone. And 4, donated goods end up in landfill. So here are 4 messages: only cash, clogging, delaying, or landfill. All right, so hopefully your phones will magically give you the options and you can decide what you think is the most effective point to make about donations. Okay, so let's set this up. There was a study done on the most effective message?
Yeah, so this was a study by the behavioural architects, who I believe have worked previously with HAG and ACFID, and they conducted a number of interviews throughout Australia. Based on those interviews, they tested these different messages. And so the authors suggested that this message was successful because it's very black and white. It speaks directly to our system 1, that very automatic, habitual way of thinking. And there's no ambiguity about it. It's not that, oh, it'll take a long time to get to the disaster zone, but it'll get there in the end. No, it's just going straight to landfill there. So,
and most people, that's a little nudge there as well.
We look to what other people do as well, and we're influenced by what the majority of people are doing. And so here there's a little subtle message there that most people are donating cash, and perhaps that's also contributing too.
It's just really interesting. The Royal Commission on the response to the bushfires, actually, this was one of the recommendations, was to educate the Australian public about not giving stuff in emergencies.
Yes.
So it's relevant in both contexts.
Yeah. Best nudge device ever. We're walking around carrying these little things that connect us to the world, and we can have SMS messages and images come up. Tell us about Haiti.
So in the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake, there was a campaign in which influential social figures, Michelle Obama in this case, encouraged people to text a number 90999 to donate $10, and that would automatically donate $10 to earthquake relief. And I think this is a really nice example of some of those general principles of behaviour change, some that we've talked about earlier on. It's very easy. So, you know, we talked about defaults. You don't have to decide how much you're going to donate, who you're going to donate, where you're going to donate to. That's all being decided for you. It's a very quick and easy text message to do. It's also very social. You've got a credible authority like Michelle Obama telling you what to do. I think I just wanted to add, you know, till now we've been talking about some of those general principles of behaviour change. Those are the nudges, the quick wins that will help improve your chances of success when you're changing behaviour. But we're also working with really difficult challenges in complex systems as well. And in these cases, certainly those general principles will help, but they'll only get you so far.
So beyond nudges, lessons we've learned from complex systems. Go on.
Yeah, so we wanted to make the point there that in the humanitarian world, we're often working with these difficult challenges in complex systems, and we can look to some of those general principles, those nudges. They'll only get us so far, and I think this is where the value of behavioural science is in the methods that we can use. So it's around looking to the evidence around what has worked, consulting your stakeholders, using systems thinking and systems mapping tools to identify all the different components in the systems, and taking that proper deep dive to understand some of those barriers and drivers and the role of context in that system. And so we wanted to use that as a bit of an analogy of a complex system where you might have different stakeholders, they might have different interests and backgrounds and agendas. They might not be speaking the same language, literally and figuratively. And so we're thinking about the role of behaviour science in that sort of messy system. And I think for us, we look to some of our work in the healthcare system and also in domestic disaster response as an analogy of a very complex system where you have different stakeholders, and also where there's that urgency, the priority to save lives as well, and that do no harm approach to things. And in some of these projects, we've looked at similar sorts of themes and things to the humanitarian system. So things like, how do we empower patients in the hospital system? How do we get them to speak up and have empowering conversations and engage with the system? We've looked at how do we get different hospital sites to collaborate, so breaking down the silos and fostering that general collaborative mindset. And also looking at sustainability as well. Again, this is a high pressure, intense situation where there's a priority to save lives, but how do we get doctors and nurses to carry out correct waste separation and create a more sustainable healthcare system?